Fan art is a great way to me to put the things I learn about drawing into practice, since it doesn't require you to come up with characters on your own, and you can show your own interests through it. I love getting to draw the characters I personally like a lot, and it makes me even happier when I can connect with other people who like the same character through it. Hi, here's May, and as you can maybe tell from the many videos I've already made about drawing Genshin Impact characters, I like it a lot, and for today's video I'll talk about my experience of drawing different Genshin Impact fanarts for 14 days. First, I'll show you the preparation I did for this. I was inspired by lots of B project cards for the poses in the illustrations and how I wanted them to look like. At the time of doing the illustrations, I had just finished going through some B project cards. I like to do this with different fandoms and go onto the fandom site to look at CGs and save my favorite ones as images. I've also already done this for Ensemble Stars cards, for example. I also decided to use 3D models for the illustrations, since I like to pose models from time to time when I'm not able to draw and only use my phone. After doing some really rough thumbnail sketches of poses, I used the app Magic Poser to get the 3D model references. Before doing the illustrations, I also experimented a bit with colors, since I was unsure whether I preferred more desaturated or saturated ones and how cool or warm they should be. On this mood board you can see all the references I used, also including some art from other artists that were my current inspirations. Now I briefly talk about each illustration. I started off strong with actually drawing a small comic, meaning I drew Xingqiu and Chongyun in 2 angles actually. To simplify the process, I just copied and pasted the 2 drawings and only changed up the expression. For drawing small stories like these, I find this makes sense, since for them the story, what happened, matters more than that each individual drawing is very pretty. That's also why most comics, manga or webtoons have either no coloring or rather simple coloring. It would be really time consuming to render each drawing and add complex lighting and shadows. I've drawn many small comics of these 2 before, and from time to time I get an idea for a cute small interaction they could have, and sometimes I draw it. I often find myself either cringing a bit when I'm drawing characters interacting in a cute way, or I smile at my drawing tablet happily because seeing the characters be cute together makes me happy as well. Now we move on to an illustration of Child. Here I spent a long time on adjusting the face and also the eyes. I made them a lot more detailed and painterly than I usually do. I, for example, also didn't do line art for the iris outline. I'm not sure if I prefer this look over the usual line art look I would go for. While drawing him, I also figured out a nice way to check if I like how the face shape looks, similar to what I do with the hair, filling the silhouette in during the sketching phase to check if the volume works. I do this with the face shape now as well. I also added in a bit of additional lighting coming from the right on an overlay layer on top of my regularly shaded colors in the end. And for day 3 we have Zhongli. I spent around 20 minutes on adding some hair strand details here. I had trouble with his hair strands in the front not properly going back to hair's origin point. His eyes are more far open than in his in-game look. It's something that I notice happens when I draw more adult characters often. It tends to make the character look cuter and younger, which I'm not sure about if I like it, but overall I like how his face turned out. On the next day I drew Child and Zhongli together. I had a bit of trouble with the bodies and heads working together, meaning that the pose would make sense and parts would overlap correctly. I find when drawing ship illustrations, since you have 2 characters, you have to think more about the angle you view the characters from, as well as what pose they would make, so it seems realistic, but also so that the viewer of the illustration can see both characters nicely. Then, as I do with almost all my illustrations, I had some pose variations in there. Most of the time I only have variations for the hand pose or maybe the head angle, but here I had ones with the arm, one where Child's right hand would be at Zhongli's face and the left one at his waist, and one where the right hand would be at his arm and the left one at his neck. I also had Child closing his eyes as variation as well. You can comment which version you prefer if you want to. The one with the right hand at his face or arm and with the eyes closed or open. Now we move on to another ship illustration, Zhao and Ether. I've drawn these 2 a longer time ago already, and I always imagined they'd kind of have this sun and moon dynamic. I would also ship Zhao with Venti though, so with Genshin ships in general, by drawing the characters here together, I don't want to make it seem like I think that only these ships are valid to me and I don't like any other ones. I'm okay with most ships, and if you ship other characters, that's also fine to me. For example, I've also seen Child being shipped with Lumine or Zhao with her, which I have no problem with. In this illustration, the perspective of Ether's head was really difficult to figure out to me, even if I had the 3D model at first as a reference. I tend to only use it as a rough guide, especially for the head. I like to draw it myself. The head was too wide and too flat to me at first. I also was unsure about the head size compared to the body for some time with both Zhao and Ether here. For day 6, I drew Cyno and Tighnari. I've only drawn these two times before, and I find their designs pretty different from the other Genshin characters, so drawing them was interesting. You'll see that I tried out a bunch of different lighting scenarios here, and in the end I went with highlighting from the back, which is something I've almost never drawn before. The way I shaded for these illustrations was to first do some regular shading, then I'd add in multiply or overlay layers if I wanted to, with light coming from different directions. Next, we move on to a singular character again, which is Wanderer. At first I was unsure of how I wanted the shoulders and his head to line up so it would create an interesting pose. I went with some angled shoulders, but I straight head and head here. I took a long time with drawing his hands since I experimented with many hand poses. I took away that I only want to sketch in around 5 hand variations at most to avoid having too many options, because it makes it more difficult for me to choose which one to go for later on, and I'm not taking as much time sketching the hands in. For day 7 I drew Kazuha. You'll see that I tried to add some flowy parts from his scarf during this drawing process, but I couldn't figure out a way for them to align nicely with his pose, so I decided they would just hang down in the back so you wouldn't see them. While drawing the illustrations here, I also see I sometimes drew pretty long necks. I would draw them shorter and the heads a bit smaller if I were to draw this again now. I would also focus on making the faces look less flat. Back to drawing some ships. Remember what I talked about for Child and Zhongli? Here you can see for a hug like this, it would be impossible to show both characters' faces in a front angle with the angle I used. If you'd use an angle from the side and one character's head would be above the other's, that would work for example, but here I just had Razor's head in a side profile. I've often also seen illustrations where you only see one character's face, for example, too, though. As long as the poster characters are in, convey the action they're doing correctly, that can work as well. I've also seen a couple illustrations where you just see the hands of two characters together or both leaning against each other from the back as well. So it's not necessary to show the face, get the action across, but the face is what clarifies how the character feels the most. Now on to the next illustration. I was having a hard time with drawing the eyes so it would look like they really look at each other here. I especially didn't like how Thomas' eye shape looked while drawing. While drawing, I try to be mindful when I'm taking too long for something and getting slow. When this happens, I either try to finish as quickly as possible or I just stop and move on to something else and come back to it later on. I like to find out why I'm getting slow and write it down. It's good to reflect on what takes too long, then you can figure out why it might be the case and maybe focus on studying and drawing the thing you're currently struggling with more often. Since I realized I was struggling with the eyes, I've been watching more tutorials about them recently. I also plan to do a eye tutorial video as a follow-up to my head tutorial video soon. For day 10, I drew some characters I was really excited to draw, since I was seeing a lot of fanart of them on Instagram and I like their dynamic a lot. We have Kaveh and Alhaitham. Whenever I'm drawing crossed arms like Kaveh's here, I have to get references for it. The same goes for hands on the hips. I find they can be difficult to draw, whereas for stretched out hands, I can sometimes get away with not using references, probably because I've already drawn many hands like this before. I like how the black color of Alhaitham's arm and outfit kind of frame both their heads. I find it separates the illustration into the lower part with their bodies and the upper part with their heads and helps to put more focus to their heads. Now we're moving on to drawing Chongyun and Xingqiu once again. Similarly to what I did for Child and Zhongli's illustration from day 4, I did some pose variations here, with Chongyun's head being turned more to the right or more to the left. I imagined it could be like he at first reacts surprised to Xingqiu putting his arms around him from behind and then he looks at him. I also did add variations for the arms, having them overlap in different ways. I had Xingqiu's right hand be up at Chongyun's chest or down around his waist, and Chongyun's arm either in front of his chest, the right one on Xingqiu's hand on his waist, or more stretched out. You can see what I'm talking about in the time-lapse, I hope. Drawing them in different positions was nice to get some hand practice in, but it got a bit repetitive with the coloring. For day 13, I just drew Xingqiu, and speaking of repetitive, since I've drawn many characters here before, this can get a bit boring since you're just practicing a bit of perspective maybe by applying the same outfit and hairstyle for a different pose. Instead of just drawing the outfit, making it more interesting by maybe stylizing it in your own way can make this more enjoyable, but it also requires some creativity. Since the Genshin outfits are pretty complex, finding a simplified way to draw them can be very helpful, especially if you're doing something like a comic edit on day 1, where you draw the characters multiple times. Finally, for day 14, I kinda rewarded myself by drawing my favorite Genshin character, Chongyun. While drawing him, his eyes were too flat and wide open or blocky to me, so I tried fixing it a bit, and similarly to what I did for Child on day 2, I experimented with a more painterly look. I wanted to draw him holding a card, since for Xingqiu's illustration before, I added a book, but while doing this I realized I've never drawn someone holding a card before, and I got hand references for it. Right now I'm thinking about turning Razor and Bennett and maybe Kaveh and Alhaitham's illustrations into stickers. You can comment if you're interested in having any other one of them as stickers as well. And now I'll share my main takeaway from drawing the characters. Since I didn't spend a lot of time questioning things while doing these illustrations, it meant I could finish them faster, but I also didn't develop and learn through drawing them that much. Similar to the fanarts project I talked about last week, I generally tended to draw with a quantity over quality mindset. This is mainly because for my past projects I would focus on drawing lots of illustrations. For example, for drawing Genshin Impact characters with modern outfits, 2 times, once with 9 illustrations and once with 20. The Genshin Impact memory illustrations, which were 16, just like with the MBTI illustrations. Most importantly, of course, drawing all the Genshin Impact characters, which were 64 total drawings. What tends to happen here is that the illustrations fit together style-wise, but doing the same steps over and over leads to a lack of improvement and experimentation. I also have to say I'm a person who likes having a routine and clear steps, which is why I like to plan lots of poses for projects as well as figure out a workflow I can use throughout the whole project. I like to get comfortable with this, but part of improving as an artist comes from questioning the way you draw things and trying out new things. Because of this, I want to focus a lot more on, for one, quality and taking my time with the illustrations, more often taking a step back and looking at the art again the next day, not finishing the illustrations I do in just one day, but maybe split up my steps, like sketching one day and doing line art the next day and so on. I have a lot of project ideas I would like to do, but in the end, for people to value my art, it's important that it moves them in some way. For these illustrations, they may make some other people that like the Genshin Impact characters here happy, but to me, I could probably enhance my art a lot more by really putting more atmosphere and life into it. For this, it's of course important to figure out who you are, what you like and so on. I already try to draw what I personally like in my projects by drawing fan art of characters or designing characters based around my interests like the MBTI or the Sun, Moon and Stars. But what I also want to focus more on is adding more details to make each illustration more unique to me. I would like to add things like clouds or sparkles that give the illustration a more dreamy vibe, for example. I really want to try including more of this in my art later on, and I could see myself talking a bit more about my interests in future videos as well if you're interested. Then just studying, practicing and improving on the fundamentals is of course also really important to become better as an artist, and it helps you to figure out how you want to portray and stylize different elements in your art. That will be it for this video. If you want to, you can comment your favorite illustration from these, or just your favorite Genshin characters or ships. I always love to talk about anything Genshin Impact related. Thanks for watching, I hope this video could make your day a bit better, and have a nice day. Bye!